Hey guys, Anfield here, bringing you all an intro guide to Black Desert's PvP mechanics. A highly requested video, especially given the introduction of the Arena of Solar. I believe for some people, PvP is an intimidating activity, and I hope I can alleviate some of that unease when approaching it by explaining the mechanics and how they work. I highly recommend learning to PvP and play your class in PvP, not only because PvP can be some of the most fun and socially interactive content in the game, but also because it'll add layers of depth to your class you never knew existed if you just fight mobs. Without further ado though, let's get started. Let's start with what I think is the best way to begin learning any new class in PvP, and what I'd recommend you practice first on your class specifically, and that's protection. BDO has three main protection states. This is referring to a state of being that will protect you from CC or crowd control. The aim here is to protect yourself from the enemy CC attempts while also attempting to land your own CCs. So what are the three protected states? Well, there's Super Armor, Forward Guard, and iframe, or Invincible Frame. If you have the correct setting turned on, you can visually get an icon to indicate when you're in one of these states. You can also see this on enemies if you're inside the battle arena. This is very helpful to learn other classes' protected animations, but only works in the battle arena for practice purposes. So let's begin with Super Armor, which you might hear referred to quickly as SA by other players. Super Armor will protect you from all CC types except for grabs. It is the best for dealing damage in a group fight though, and it will prevent you from being CC'd. It is extremely useful in the arena for reasons I'll explain when I get to Forward Guard. Super Armor doesn't typically lower incoming damage except for rare cases, but you should refer to your class guides to see if your class qualifies here. One other downside to Super Armor, despite its 360 degrees of protection, is that you can be slowed in Super Armor. This means that a class throwing slows either movement or attack will land on you as if you were unprotected. Next up is Forward Guard. Like the name implies, it is any skill or block that throws up a protected guard in front of you from incoming CC. However, it differs from Super Armor in a few ways. First, it does not give you 360 degrees of protection, only in front of you. Second, it applies a guard against all incoming damage and slows, not just CC. If your guard survives, you will take no damage at all. It does give you a gauge you can read that starts at 100, which is affected by your HP, damage reduction, and evasion stats to determine how strong it is. Your guard gauge will recover when you're not in Forward Guard, so Super Armor, iframe, or unprotected stances will recover your Forward Guard. If your guard is broken, you will receive a debuff and you'll be unable to recover your guard until that debuff fades. All blocks in this game are Forward Guard, although some are also Super Armor, meaning they are fully protected at all angles and block damage and slows from the front. Forward Guard, like Super Armor, can still be grabbed however, and due to the lack of 360 degrees of protection in the 3v3 Arena of Solar, even though you may use it to damage a CC target in front of you, their ally can easily maneuver behind you and instantly punish you. Most classes in this game can hold S with their weapon out and apply what is called an S block, which is basically Forward Guard that activates via walking if you're attacked, but you have to be walking backwards. Succession, Ranger, and Shy are currently examples of classes that cannot S-block. Finally, for protection, we have iframes, the ultimate in protection. Iframes refer to the invulnerability you can have during the frames of an animation of a skill, and are the best form of protection as you cannot receive damage, slows, or CC, or even be grabbed. Although damage or CC is rare out of fully iframed abilities, some classes can cancel in and out of iframes so fast they can fish for CC or damage and nearly be impossible to CC in return. Which, for those watching this guide just for something to watch but are familiar with BDO PvP, you will know I'm referring to Sorks. Now let's move on to CCs, or crowd control again. Having mastered your class's protection rotation, CCs are the next obvious step. Crowd control prevents you from performing any action for the duration of that crowd control if it lands successfully. This is important as it allows you to apply safe damage to your opponent and in some cases boost the damage, which we'll touch upon later, while also not being able to be vulnerable to damage from that target yourself. Since not every class has enough outright damage to kill someone even though they're in SA, applying a CC is often the catalyst of a kill. The CCs in BDO are as follows: Knockdown, Bound, Float, Stun, Stiffen, and Knockback. There is also freezes from mages, which combine CCs, and also Downsmashes, which we will cover later. There is a little bit more nuance with CC than with protection, so we'll begin with the rules that govern CC mechanics in BDO. Essentially, every time you apply a successful CC, a counter will begin. You can see this counter visually when you attack the dummies in the battle arena. They also display a CC duration. The counter is essentially tracking the weight of the CC you applied until it gets to 2. Each primary CC is weighted at 1, although 2 of them are weighted at 0.7. This may sound confusing, but it actually is relatively simple. What it basically means is that you can usually CC someone twice, as in each CC is worth 1, you can CC someone up to 2. So the initial CC and then a reset to continue the CC state. For example, the most effective CC in this game is Knockdown, which used the first time would count as a 1, and then you can use it again to keep your opponent in the CC state longer, which would bring you to 2. Now, your opponent is immune to all CCs for a few seconds because you've hit that 2. When someone uses the term 1 comboed, this is what they mean. 2 hard CCs and you kill your target. So what CCs are 0.7 and how does that work with the 1.0 CCs? Well, both Stiffen and Knockback are 0.7 weight. This means that if you use them as the first initial CC or as a second CC, if your target was stunned first, for example, or something, you can then use a third CC, putting you to 2.7. So to expand on that math a little bit, let's use our earlier knockdown example. Let's say I knock back my opponent first instead of knock down. So now my CC target counter has gone to 0.7. Then I knock them down, we're at 1.7, we're still under 2. Then after that I apply some damage and I apply a brand new knockdown. They're now CC'd again, but another CC cannot be applied again for a few seconds because they're immune, because obviously we've now reached 2.7. So as long as you're under that 2, you can apply a new CC. I realize that may take a rewatch or two, but if you didn't get it the first time, there will be an oh moment, I promise. Moving on, I want to talk about resistances, one of the most controversial topics in the PvP community. You may already be familiar with this in PvE and notice the stat on various gear, buffs, or crystal pieces. In PvE, you can have 100% resistance to monsters, but in PvP, it's capped at 80% even if you have more. Then the game takes into account the ignore resistances a player applying a CC has, which is not a stat you can see in the game currently. I hope they add it. So you have to sort of do your own adding up here, but you will see the resistance levels your character has in its character profile screen. If, for example, you have 45% ignore resistance against a player that has 100% knockdown resistance, let's say, the 45% is reduced from 80%. So that's what's effective in PvP basically. So the player would have 35% chance to resist your knockdown. It's controversial because in many cases you have to leave protection to apply a CC, which if it is resisted leaves you vulnerable to a counter CC. This of course could mean you can lose a fight over a dice roll your enemy has won. There is a large movement in the PvP community to have CC resistance scrapped, as RNG should really have no place in competitive PvP, especially when classes that already have extremely good protections use it as a secondary protection layer to save themselves from mistakes. With all that out of the way, let's actually talk about the CCs themselves more than just what they're weighted for at the counter. So I stated earlier that Knockdown is the strongest CC. This is for a few reasons. First, it lasts the longest. This is an obvious advantage due to the extra time you have to apply damage and such. Second, it stops you from V'ing. So if you've ever wondered why you can't V, this is why. You can V if someone resets you with another KD, but you only have a short window to do so. Third, Knockdown puts you on the floor. This allows skills that benefit from the down attack modifier to do more damage, which is 120% instead of 100% of its normal damage in PvP. For these reasons, Knockdown is the most commonly built resistance, with adamantines in the boots being a popular choice. Next up, we have Bound. Bound is a basically knockdown light. It does put you on the floor, albeit for a little less time, but you can V if you are bounded. On top of that, it also shares the same resistance as Knockdown, so that can be a downside to it. Again, down attacks can be applied here since you're putting your opponents on the floor. For the final CC to put you on the floor, we have Float, which first spins you in the air. This skill can allow for huge damage on some classes due to the air attack combos they have. This is a stronger modifier than down attack, but only really some classes, like I said, can actually do that. You may also be air smashed, which is an extension to the CC while you're in the air still. It doesn't add to the counter, but it does extend the period that you're CC'd. You can V, however, when you are floated, and the duration is very short. However, it is rare that someone will build a resist against float. Stun is a long duration CC that keeps you standing, but your character will sort of sway a bit and hold their heads, looking kind of like some drunk RP. Stuns can be deadly, with classes that move fast and get behind you to apply back attacks as you stand there helplessly. Back attack modified damage is the same damage modifier on down attack, so there's no advantage in that case if you can back attack over a down attack. You can also V during stuns though. Stiffen will freeze your character in place, and as I mentioned earlier, only counts as a 0.7 CC. The reason for that is because the very short duration, you have to basically react super fast to actually follow up with another CC after the stiff. You can V during stiffens, and it shares resist with stuns and even freeze, which is arguably an underrated resist stat if you're an immoral resist builder. Knockback is the other CC that is 0.7. It does what the name suggests and move your character back in a stumble animation. It too is very short, so you have to be fast to react with a follow-up again. However, just like KD, you cannot V a knockback. You can of course V the follow-up CC if you're slamming that V button in the transition like you slammed the like button for this video though. Knockback shares this resist with float, so again, it's rarely resisted. It also is worth mentioning that in some classes have skills that move through knockback. So if you're in a forward guard but they move through you, it can CC you if it's timed correctly. So let's move on to down smash and air smash. Often confused with damage modifiers down attack and air attack, the smash mechanics are actually CC extensions that don't count as real CCs, so the weights aren't affected. A down smash without add-ons is a 30% chance of success. Especially after the class reworks, most classes can't really down smash as much as before, but Mystic is probably the best class by far for doing it. If you're successful, you can essentially down smash someone enough, even though they've become immune to the regular CC count, to outlast that immunity and hit them with a new hard CC and start all over again. But again, mostly this is just done by Mystics these days. Air Smash can't really be done like this, by one person at least, but it looks pretty cool if you land it, and then it extends the airtime of the class that you've CC'd. I realize I didn't cover freezing, but it's only 2 classes on the top of my head that actually can do it, and it doesn't really do anything super unique. It's important to keep in mind that some skills have 2 CCs on them, but usually it's something like Stiffen into a knockdown or bound, so you won't hit that 2.0 immediately. I already mentioned slows, and that only an unprotected stance or super armor stance will allow you to be slowed, but they can be even more effective than some CCs in some cases in crippling other classes. I could make an argument that they are too oppressive and free to apply, but that's for another time. It's worth quickly going over PA, or protected area. This is a mechanic that takes its name from the original users, Wizard and Witch, who have the OG protected area. However, Valk also has a skill very similar called Elian's Blessing, but again, people still call it PA. The reason being is that they all share the mechanic of 50% or more damage reduction to yourself, and in the case of Valks and Mages, to allies. Examples of PAs that are for the person using the skill only can be seen on like Mystic and Dracania. If you do receive Valk or Mage PA, you will notice a debuff that indicates you cannot get PA for a time. This is to prevent guilds stacking PA by having loads of Mages and Valks, which for a long time was the defining meta of large-scale PvP in BDO. That covers most major mechanics, but some honorable mentions worth bringing up here are as follows. E-buffs, the player term for the 3-minute cooldown buff your class has in both Succession and Awakening specs that give you a massive power boost. They go by other names too, like Q-buff, but basically comes down to what the player is used to inputting on their class. Z or Absorb. So if you have 100% Black Spirit Rage and you press Z, you gain that attack and casting speed buff and AP buff. You can actually feed it to other players, but they only get half, they'll get 50%. This is how players get to 200% usually, without like really weird gear. You also gain this if you use your 100% attack ability. So if you use the attack, you still get the attack speed and casting buff, or AP buff as well, as if you'd absorbed it. This brings me to 10, 25%, and 50% BSR skills. Awakening classes have those, which mean that if you do not lock them, you'll use them by default if you input correctly for them. Usually they do alter the inputs though. If you want to lock all your rage, you can press Alt plus B, or you can click on the BSR icon to lock specific BSR skills, so you don't use them but you can use others. And moving on, you can also lock abilities that you don't want to activate in your skill tree. If you look at the skill and look for the little lock icon, your class guides should tell you if this is something you need to do, and usually it is. Most classes by default lock the evasion skill that all classes get, but again, double check that your class isn't the exception to this. Just to go back to BSR skills real quick, all levels of BSR skills from 10 to 200% can knock enemy players off of horses. So classes with the solid 10% BSR skills, which is obviously awakening classes, say like Musa for example, are excellent for doing this, and by extension they defend cannons in node wars and siege as well, because they can get rid of the doom horses trying to destroy your cannons. In PC BDO, players can use the mouse to move option to influence the direction of some of their skills. This is what players are referring to when they mention mouse movement. The impact can be seen on many classes, but one of the biggest examples is Berserker. A class with mobility are the best effective skills usually. So it's controversial due to the desync it can cause, because the game will predict you to end up somewhere that it expects you to do typically, and if you don't do that due to the manipulation by mouse movement, it can cause desync. Finally, and there is likely something I forgot to add as usual, but I'd like to mention core skills. These are awakening abilities that you can alter to apply either a CC if they don't have one, or a protection if they don't have one. For example, Awakening Rangers usually take Waltz of Wind, which adds super armor to a skill that already has knockback. The animation slightly changes on skills that are made into cores. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and that it helped you. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, but it's often easier simply to ask me on my live stream so I can demonstrate things and respond instantly. You can check me out at twitch.tv/AnfieldW. If you're intimidated by PvP, it's important to remember that everybody starts somewhere, and you can get into PvP without any worry about gear in various ways, such as trial characters in Battle Arena, Arena of Solar, Tier 1 Node Wars, Capped Siege Wars, and during seasons you can do the seasonal Arsha. I highly recommend looking at joining a Tier 1 Node War guild. Gear is capped on the Balanos and Surrender regions and provide a gear cap space for you to practice and enjoy trying to take territory with your guild. I apologize if there's any mistakes in this guide. A lot of information about PvP and BDO and mechanics wise is player founded. Basically, we have to figure it out ourselves, so I do apologize if there are any mistakes, but I did try to do my best to sort of formulate it all into one guide rather than have the information all fragmented. But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time.